how it's like to live with such a failing currency.
Their salary at the end of the month was only enough to buy a coffee. In my country right now, we have 80% of our people in poverty, 50% of people in extreme poverty. In Venezuela, for example, 70% of transactions are done either in Bitcoin or in a stablecoin. Bitcoin gives the opportunity for people to protect their assets in a way that gold would not allow it. If you are a rich person in a war, you cannot take your house and move it.
For a European, for a French, what signals would you tell them to watch?
When you think about the cost of living in Europe, you already see a bit of the warning signs when it comes to the inflation. I think the most important lesson that people really need to have, I would say that is...
Hi everybody, thanks for being with us on the Bitstack channel. Today we have an exceptional host, Jorge Jraissati. He's an economist, he's Venezuelan. He's going to talk to us about the life in a country where money dies, but also the Bitcoin in Venezuela and what's next for the future of this country under Reconstruction and what we can do for Venezuela. So Jorge Jraissati, hi. Thanks for being with us on the podcast. So you're a Venezuelan economist. You've been working in Venezuela and then in the US. You've lived under Maduro and under the collapsing currency in Venezuela. So you're going to tell us a bit more about how it's like to live in such a situation, but also your plans for the future of Venezuela, because it's a country that's changing a lot, especially since early 2026. But first, let's talk a bit about you. What's your background? What's your economic studies? What do you do now? Before we dig deeper into your what you lived through in Venezuela.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I love to be here, and I think you're doing a pretty good job. So I'm an economist, and my passion my entire life has been economics. I have my think tank called Economic Inclusion Group, and we do a lot of work to improve financial inclusion, but we are also planning a reconstruction plan for Venezuela. So I do that. I also do advisory for people interested in understanding better the Venezuelan economy. So I joined this space, or I became an economist because I saw how rich my country is in natural resources, but at the same time I saw how poor my society has become. Venezuela, the economic collapse of Venezuela is the biggest in the history of the Western Hemisphere. So I grew up in that environment and I saw the development, and that really motivated me to understand economics, to study economics. Then I studied economics in the US, and I have been working on it ever since. I have advised many institutions, including the European Parliament, the Council of Europe. I have advised policymakers also in Washington, because my passion is to find ways to have more prosperous economy. I think it's essential not only for people's life, but for the future of democracy as a whole.
So you grew up in Venezuela. As we just said, it's a very specific society where there's a lot of wealth in terms of natural resources and services and people, but the society itself has become poorer and poorer over the previous decades. When did you understand that your country was drifting? Is there a specific memory, a moment that marks that for you? What was it like to grow up and see firsthand this trajectory for such a country?
I think the word trajectory is the right word, because countries don't collapse in one day or in 1 year. It's always a deterioration process that took place in Venezuela. So for instance, Venezuela in the 1980s used to be the richest country in Latin America. People used to move to Venezuela because there was better opportunities in Venezuela. Many people used to have great businesses who then became export businesses. So Venezuelan companies used to dominate the Latin American market as a whole. That all changed in the 1990s, and particularly in the 2000s, and particularly in the 2010s, where the economy really became declining, ultimately became a collapse. And it's something that you can see. You can see that every year more businesses were closing. Every year you can see that inflation was rising in Venezuela. For the people that were following the macroeconomics of the country, you could see that the budget deficits were getting higher and higher, that the debt was becoming unsustainable in Venezuela, and that really the public finances of the country were going into a direction of collapse. Because when certain economic policies are implemented, collapse and decay is the ultimately and the inevitable outcome. Policies that make life more difficult for people who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to create, who want to innovate, and also policies that make Venezuela's infrastructure, public services, and all these very essential features that all economies need to have way more difficult to get. The corruption scandals in Venezuela was something that was taking place every single year. So I grew up in that kind of environment in which I saw the total dismantling of Venezuela's economic institutions and also Venezuela's political institutions, because we were a democracy and we became a more autocratic system, a system in which people cannot express themselves freely in their political ideas, in their political views. And that, of course, has extremely bad effects for the economics of the country. The result of that is that sadly in my country right now, we have 80% of our people in poverty. We have 50% of people in extreme poverty. We have 8 million people, which is roughly a third of the country, who had to flee to other places. So it's a horrible, catastrophic humanitarian collapse, what we have in Venezuela. And I'm sure and I hope that we can change that, because we are a very good country with a lot to offer, which I'm sure that we will talk about it later.
Yeah. Maybe to make it a bit more concrete for the audience, you have a memory, a detail which will embody what it's like to live in a country where the system collapses, but also and most likely for the audience that is interested in Bitcoin, what it's like to live in a country where the currency also collapses. Do you have an image or a memory of that?
There are things that people take for granted when you live in developed countries. For example, the fact that you have electricity every day, the whole day. This is something that looks so basic, to have electricity, to be able to just have light in your house or in your business the whole day. In Venezuela, when I was born, that was the case. People have electricity, just like a normal middle income or high income country these days. And then I realized that when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, every year, power blackouts became way more the norm in Venezuela. So at the beginning, it was a couple of power blackouts per week. So people didn't have electricity 1 hour or 2 hours. Now, most people in Venezuela don't have electricity 6, 7 hours per day. This is something so simple, but it's something that if you lose it, you will notice immediately. Without electricity, you cannot do anything. You cannot rest, you cannot work, you cannot do anything. And that's a real problem. So that's one scenario. To make it very concrete.
And how do you go around that, for example?
It's very problematic, right? Because people then try to find ways to go around it, as you're mentioning. So for example, the 1 or 2 hours that you don't have electricity, you focus on something else, to do something outside. But the reality is that if you don't have electricity 6, 7 hours during the day, and Venezuela is a hot weather. So for example, I have family in a very hot area of Venezuela, and if you don't have electricity during the noon, 1, 2 p.m. during the day, where it's 40 degrees out there, can become really problematic. I know people that have had serious health issues also because of that. So also if you have food, for example, in your refrigerator, that food can get damaged. So many people, their food get damaged because of extensive power blackouts. And that's a tragedy as well. The same is with the water system, for example. Right now, the water system in Venezuela, you don't have water the whole day. You only have water a few hours every single day. So people try to find ways to overcome it, depending on, of course, the income of every person. They find ways, but really is this not the way to live? Those are two concrete examples. The issue of insecurity in Venezuela was also a big problem, because I grew up in a place in which more and more it became normal that people were going to be kidnapped in Venezuela, that people were going to be kidnapped in their way to work or in their way to school, etc. I had classmates who were kidnapped in Venezuela. I have family members who were kidnapped in Venezuela. So for example, my grandfather, when he was an attempt to kidnap, I was the first person who the people called. So I have these kind of vivid memories. And you develop mechanisms to protect yourself, and in general, you develop a lot of resiliency when you grow up in that kind of environment. And again, I'm privileged compared to most people in Venezuela because I had a good education, good family, etc. But the reality is that it's a very tough place. So many times people like myself who are economists, we tend to think about economics on the basis of numbers and statistics. We tend to say this amount of GDP points we lost, inflation rate, we talk about budget, surplus, etc. But all these are concepts that are very cold in comparison to what they really represent. Because when we talk about a loss of X amount of GDP points, what it really means is that people are not eating, people are not getting electricity, people are not getting water supply, and people are not being able to raise their families and build their life. And that's why economics really matters.
And specifically on the currency side of things, because one of the effects of this like failing trajectory is something that most people have in mind, is that suddenly you start to see inflation numbers that are completely absurd, like 1,000%, 1,000,000%. So what's the translation of that specific angle around currency in the daily life, like supermarket scenes? How do you make conversions? How do you live? How do you receive your salary? What do you do with it? Do you like spend it the minute you receive it? How it's like to live with such a failing currency? How it affects you?
Yes, for context, Venezuela became the highest inflation rate of the entire world since 2013. So the inflation rate at the time was, I believe, 40% per year. Then it was 50, 60, to the point in which in 2018, which was one of the worst times, our inflation rate was more than 1,000% per year. And that's what's called hyperinflation. So hyperinflation is when you have a inflation rate of 50% or more per month. How do you live in those environments? It is extremely difficult to do basic day-to-day transactions because it's very difficult to set up prices. So for example, if you want to go to a restaurant, you want to buy something, there is no pricing. If you want to set wages, it's very difficult to set the pricing. So just to give you a few examples, I know a few stories of people that were workers. One of them was a teacher, another one of them was an architect. And what they told me is that because of high inflation, their salary at the end of the month really was only enough to buy a coffee because of the inflation rate. Because at the beginning of the month, that same salary was, I don't know, $300. But by the end of the month, really, it was $5, $6. Just by the fact of the devaluation of the currency. The way people start going around it is that they start setting prices not in domestic currency, but in foreign currency. But that is not easy, besides the fact that you cannot do it in contracts in many ways, at the beginning at least, because you need to do it in domestic currency by law. So it really creates all this mismanagement problem for the people who are not economists. Something that is important to understand is that prices create mechanisms for coordination. It allows people to transact. It allows people to do business. You cannot plan for the future if you don't know the price of things. Again, the most basic example could be you don't know if you can go to a restaurant tomorrow, if you don't know if that restaurant will cost you X amount of money. But if you're doing business, you cannot do business if you don't know how much you can sell your products or how much you will spend paying your workers. So the whole economy really collapses when you have high levels of inflation. That's why developed countries, they really try to keep inflation under control because that dilapidates the economy. From the more human perspective, imagine if you have a specific amount of money in savings that you have been trying to get your entire life in order to get good retirement or to buy a house or to buy the university of your children. In that case, then you have been for many years saving money, and then from one day to the next, all that money is gone. So imagine if you have $50,000 in your bank account here in France, and then because of inflation, in a couple of months, that $50,000 is $5,000. That is heartbreaking. It's extremely unfair because this is the life of people, and this is something that they have been working very hard. And it's something that is very unjust because the people that cannot access dollars or euros are the everyday people, the workers, the people that have a salary every month, and the people that actually are the richest people, they are able to save in dollars or in euros. So actually they are more protected than the everyday common person. They are the ones that I believe inflation impacts them the most.
And so when you are a company, does that mean that you change the wages and the prices of things like every single day, every week, every hour? How does it work?
There is different ways to handle this. I would say from the less technical way to the most technical way. But in general, it means to try to project how prices are going to change, is to try to set prices, for example, in dollars. But the problem is that your revenue becomes so volatile, it fluctuates so much, that then it's very difficult to actually do this. There is the issue of the transaction cost also of operating. Because if you need to, in those kind of environments, let's say that you sell a coffee and you get €5 as a result. If you don't transform that €5 into another product or foreign currency, that means that your profit margin will evaporate because that €5 will become 4, it will become 3, and it will just disappear because of inflation. So it creates an environment in which you need to move very fast. There is, of course, very sophisticated methods in which you can, these days particularly, not in 2013 and 14, but these days because of Bitcoin and stablecoins in general, you can find ways to protect yourself. But most business people don't have this level of sophistication. And that's why it's also important what you do, which is to teach people, educate people about these type of tools and that they can use, because now they can protect their business from this type of very intense volatility that we have in our country.
Just maybe one more thing before we go on to Bitcoin and then the situation of the country right now. So for a private individual, what does it mean in terms of when you get your wage? Because that's really let's say a basic question, where you would get your wage in a normal inflationary environment and you would, I don't know, put some money on a savings account and the rest is here on your bank account for you to actually pay for what you need for the whole month, for example. But when you receive a wage in a 50% inflation per month environment, then what you do? You just spend everything on day one, and like everybody does their transaction on day one of the month, and then nothing happens for the rest of the month. How do people actually manage this problem of wages?
Yeah, essentially people need to get rid of the money. You need to find ways to get rid of the money as soon as you have it, otherwise you lose it. Most people intuitively, I think they understand that. So what people do in this type of humanitarian crisis, hyperinflation scenarios, is that whatever income they have, they try to buy food. That's it. Like you receive $10, you try to buy food with that. And there is no room for savings because actually you cannot save money. So the only way to save money is through buying things. And ideally buying things that you can stockpile. But it's a lot of problem because without going into details, in Venezuela, there was laws against stockpiling items. So that way...
So if you start, for example, buying 5 chairs, just because chairs don't like disappear, there's going to be a law that says, hey, you don't stockpile chairs.
Yeah, I mean, to put it very easily, there is things that we know we use all the time. For example, you need to always use shampoo for your hair or lack of hair.
I don't.
You need to use shampoo, or there are things that you always need to use, or coffee, you can stockpile coffee, but there was laws against that because the idea is that people who stockpile are somehow evil and bad for the economy. So as a result, then it creates really problems with the economy. And I think in general, the real issue is this idea that it's not allowing people to be free. It's not allowing people to be free economically. It's putting all these controls, all this regulation, all these rules. It's messing up with their savings. It's messing up with their currency. In Venezuela, since 2003, people were not able to buy freely dollars or euros. the government assigns you a specific amount of number of dollars or euros you can access. Since 2009, we have deep, what they call production quotas. So government telling the industries what they could produce and at what quantity and what type of items. Since 2007 or 8, we have deep price regulation. So businesses were not able to put their prices freely. And this inflation issue became because of just a mismanagement of the public finances. So in Venezuela, the deficits were roughly 20% of the GDP year by year. The amount of debt that the central bank started taking on Venezuela was just gigantic. At a time in which Venezuela had a boom of oil. So we should not be borrowing money, but the state was borrowing a lot of money. And all those systems eventually explode because they cannot keep it up. They cannot keep up this level of mismanagement. And at the end, the poor people are the people who suffer the most.
So that's the transition for the fact that you are among the, I think, 7 million Venezuelans who left the country, and many of you have been using Bitcoin for years and years. Before you left, you were engaged in some activism against the situation in Venezuela to make it better. What role has Bitcoin actually played in your life, in Venezuelans' life, in this specific context, to those who left, but also for those who stayed?
Yes, my entire life I have been very focused on trying to change things in Venezuela, trying to bring back political freedom and economic freedom to Venezuela, trying to unleash the potential that my country has, because we have huge potential. We can be such a developed nation, we can be such a prosperous nation, because we have all the elements to do so. So it's a very conviction of mine to try to find ways to rebuild our economy and as a result, our political system. I have been involved in traditional activism when I was in university, when I was young. I have been very involved in policy initiatives. So for example, I have been going to the major parliaments in Europe, here in Paris, in Germany I was this week, in the European Parliament, in Strasbourg, talking to hundreds of members of parliament about the need to rebuild Venezuela and about the need to bring back freedom to Venezuela and specific efforts and reforms that we can pursue in that direction. So I have been doing that. I have been doing a lot in the US, especially in the US Congress and at the State Department and at the Treasury Department level, just trying to explain them what is the potential that we have in Venezuela and what initiatives, what reforms we can make happen to unleash the capabilities of Venezuela. On Bitcoin in particular, I have been very vocal because Bitcoin is an excellent tool that many people in my country have been using. Why I joined all this Bitcoin community, all this Bitcoin space? Because I have seen how many people use it to protect themselves from inflation, to protect themselves from currency controls. Bitcoin has become a lifeline for so many people in my country that of course I became a huge proponent and a huge advocate of Bitcoin. Me, myself, for many years, I have been sending humanitarian aid to not only Venezuela, to many countries actually. And I have always used, or in many cases, I have used Bitcoin, also in some cases stable coins, but these new tools of payments and these new tools of finance. So I saw the power of that. In Venezuela, for example, 70% of transactions are done either in Bitcoin or in a stable coin right now. So without these tools, the Venezuelan economy will be in such a worse shape than what we have right now. These tools are really a lifeline, especially in this type of very autocratic, volatile environments. And the reality is that most people in places like Paris, they're not aware that 75 or maybe 65% of people all over the world, they live in very weak financial system. They are either unbanked, they don't have bank accounts, or they are underbanked. Their bank accounts don't work really well. Just think about all the people in Africa, in Latin America, or the 10% of Europeans that don't have a bank account. All these people really benefit from having tools like Bitcoin, And this is something that's why it's so important. Many people don't understand the value of Bitcoin, but when you come from a place in which most people don't have a bank account, you realize how valuable it is.
For Venezuelans in particular, does that mean that, for example, you would receive some help from abroad, from yourself, another organization, and then it helps preserve your purchasing power and maybe transact with other people in Bitcoin in communities in Venezuela?
Yeah, the reality is that the banking sector in Venezuela collapsed. So people don't have financial tools. So they start relying on Bitcoin and on stable coins in order to provide themselves with these financial tools. So people in Venezuela, when they need to transfer money, people in Venezuela when they need to make payments, people in Venezuela when they receive remittances from their family members or friends abroad, in all these cases, Bitcoin has become a lifeline and an opportunity because the traditional banking system would not allow them to do so. The banking system in Venezuela does not work because of the crisis, and the banking system internationally will not be able to support transactions to a place like Venezuela. So in that context, these new digital assets in general have been such a lifeline for so many people. In fact, the adoption of Bitcoin and stablecoins will be so much higher in Venezuela if the government was not trying to still block it. Most people don't know, but the government in Venezuela is really trying to block this type of transactions by, for example, manipulating the currency that vendors can use, the exchange rate that they can use. They're trying to force people to use domestic currency when they buy things. So, but if that was not the case, the government really trying to undermine it, pretty much all transactions in Venezuela will be done with digital assets.
And I've seen also, I don't know if that's your case, but there's a Venezuelan economist, I think his name is Carlos Hernandez. He wrote a piece in I think it's New York Times a few years ago, saying that not only is it a way for people there to survive, but also when you would leave the country a few years ago, actually you would be stripped of everything when you left. And so he was testifying that for him at least, when he went to the US, he just went through the border and said, I don't have anything. But actually he just had like the private phrase in his head, and he came to the US and suddenly he couldn't be stripped of everything. So he still had his Bitcoin. That's another use case for people also fleeing the country. So I don't know if that's your case.
I mean, like, by the way, it is true that Bitcoin gives people this opportunity. So Bitcoin gives the opportunity for people to protect their assets in a way that gold would not allow it, even the dollar system, just because of how easy it is to just transport and move a Bitcoin. I know many people who have done that, and that's the fact. In my case, not because of the way I didn't flew the country in a very dramatic fashion. In my case, it was mostly first do university in the US. Actually, after university, I came back to Venezuela to do research on the humanitarian crisis, and then I left again. But for most people, this is really the case. And I'm wondering, not only in Venezuela, but in places like Iran right now, or in any general kind of war-torn country, you cannot move anything else. If you are a rich person in a war context, you cannot take your house and move it. You cannot sell your house. You cannot take, if you want to save in gold, you cannot move that gold. So in many ways, really, Bitcoin allows people to have this emergency backup. And of course, I have seen that in Venezuela. People that had nothing, and the only thing they have was their wallet.
We're going to move on the energy situation in Venezuela, because you have a term, you say beyond oil, because you think that when people think of Venezuela, they often think about a wasted opportunity regarding the oil situation, the oil wealth of the country. But actually, you think that people miss a lot when they use that image in their head. What is it that makes Venezuela so rich beyond oil?
Yes, I feel and I see Venezuela as an oasis of opportunities that go way beyond oil. And I will try to be precise on all these opportunities I see. So for example, in oil, people see that we have all this potential. We have the largest endowments of oil in the world, even more than Saudi Arabia. But the reality is that when it comes to natural gas, Venezuela is also a top 10 country when it comes to reserves. When it comes to gold, Venezuela is a top 10 country in endowments. And when it comes to many critical minerals, we have that in Venezuela. That's in the energy side. And the hydro capabilities of Venezuela are huge at the same time. But that's in the energy side. But if you also go to the other sides of the economy, Venezuela can become a laboratory for financial innovations because people are desperate for financial tools. Venezuela, because of geographic position, can become the hub for trade between Europe, Latin America, the US, you name it. So Venezuela really has everything to be very successful. Just think about the capacity we have to just leverage and accelerate everything when it comes to energy. Venezuela can become really the hub of energy of the region, and that goes way beyond oil, but it also includes natural gas, it also includes mining, etc. So Venezuela has all these capabilities, and the only thing that we need is we need good policy and we need good business people. If we have that, Venezuela can become a powerhouse, and it really can become a main pillar of Western civilization, especially these days that the demand for energy and electricity is increasing dramatically every single year. For example, in the US, the expectation is that electricity demand will increase by 35% in the next decade, after decades of being flat when it comes to the increase in demand. Why this happens is because of the rise of data centers. Data centers consume a lot of electricity, a lot of energy, so you actually need to provide that energy. But in general, the way I see the demand of energy and the increase in the demand of energy is because of the rise of AI, but it's also because of the electrification of industry as a whole, and it's also because of the increase of conflict and global and tensions, wars, that also creates a lot of demand for energy, because the military buildups that you see all over the world, you need a lot of energy in order to do that. So if you combine all these aspects, you will see that energy is the single most important factor of the economy of the 21st century. If you don't have reliable sources of energy, if you don't have abundance on energy, then the economies of your country will really be decimated. They will really be weakened as a result. This is something that I believe all governments understand right now, and they see in Venezuela a huge opportunity that will bring them energy security, and hopefully will bring Venezuelans also for us prosperity and better stability.
And you were talking about energy, and especially, for example, wasted energy in this sense in Venezuela. Well, can also be gas flaring, but maybe extra capacity in hydroelectricity. You were saying that you have a very high potential in terms of hydro in Venezuela. This wasted energy, you were mentioning when we were having the conversation that actually that's also a place where Bitcoin can play a role. With Bitcoin mining that we've covered in also another video, specifically in Africa, in Congo. But on the ground, how do you think that actually Bitcoin mining could be part of the policies that could help the country leverage its immense energy wealth?
I think that the relation between Bitcoin mining and the energy capabilities of a country is something that is fascinating, and most people don't understand really well. Most people see a Bitcoin mining as a negative to a country's energy capability because they consume a lot of energy. But the reality is that Bitcoin mining is better placed at specific locations in which energy is wasted, meaning energy is just being wasted and nothing is being done with that. This is what we call a stranded energy. How this happens? For example, in Venezuela, we have huge hydro capabilities, but at the same time, our electrical grid is really weak because of decades of lack of investment. If you combine that with other factors, it means that you have a huge amount of energy that is just wasted. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go to the houses, and it could be used for that. So if you put Bitcoin mining there, it is very profitable for the person doing Bitcoin mining. It is very profitable for the state because you can make agreements to collect some taxation from that in order to improve your grid. And at the same time, it allows you to make the grid way more resilient as a result. So in Venezuela, we have this huge amount of hydro capability that is wasted, which is the most straightforward way actually to monetize and to do Bitcoin mining, or to do any kind of even AI data center support from that. But if we focus on the Bitcoin mining, that's a big opportunity. Also is with the natural gas. So in Venezuela, because we have very outdated ways of just producing natural gas, we blow to the air huge amounts of wasted energy. We blow to the air. I've been told different figures, but the most optimistic, they even say $1 billion per year worth of energy. That when we produce natural gas, this energy is wasted to the air, and that if we manage to internalize it and to turn into Bitcoin mining, it could be worth $1 billion per year. That will bring, of course, a lot of prosperity to people, and that will also bring a lot of resources to the state in order to actually improve their electrical grid. So this is something that right now is happening in Venezuela. There is a lot of legal and policy limitations, and that's the reason people are not able to invest in Venezuela. Right now, it is not possible to do Bitcoin mining in Venezuela for many reasons. I have been approached by many people who are interested in doing Bitcoin mining in Venezuela because they see the huge profit opportunity it exists, but I'm telling them that they need to wait until it's safe, because right now there is no conditions, and the government has said several times in repeated occasions that they will not allow Bitcoin mining to be in Venezuela. In Venezuela, many people were doing mining until 2018, 2019, something along those lines. But since then, the government has confiscated pretty much all Bitcoin mining operations. So the government is the only one who is actually doing Bitcoin mining themselves.
So since then, it's forbidden by law.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, how did you are working on what you call a reconstruction fund? How did this idea of reconstruction fund, based on all of this, come to you? What was your trigger, and what are you trying to build with this reconstruction fund?
Yes, in my advisory, we are really working very hard in order to create what we call the Venezuela Reconstruction Fund, which is a way to attract capital to Venezuela so it can be deployed in the areas that we think has the highest return and produce the most benefit to people in Venezuela. And again, everything is around energy. Energy is what we believe that is the main core opportunity in Venezuela because of all the reasons that we have talked to right now. So in Venezuela, there is a huge need for investment. There is a huge need for principal business people to deploy capital. And this is something that we are working on very aggressively. And we're trying to raise money, and we're trying to raise money from good business people. And our thesis is that Venezuela will become an incredible recovery story. The same way that we lost 75% of our GDP, it means that we will grow again. It means that there will be a rebound effect in Venezuela. It also means that Venezuela will become the energy hub of the region, and that will unlock a lot of opportunities in the country. Because of these two factors, Venezuela becomes a very desirable investment opportunity, a very profitable investment opportunity, and the risks that people see are risks that can be mitigated with good policy and with good management of the political relations and the risk involved in doing that. I think that Venezuela still needs way more policy reforms. So despite the fact that I'm talking about investment, I'm also talking about the need to do policy reforms in the country, because that is essential to really unlock the potential of Venezuela. In Venezuela right now, there is not many players entering into the country, because after 2 decades of being close to markets, of course, there is so much know-how that was lost in Venezuela. Most people really don't understand the market. Most firms don't have offices in Venezuela. So getting information on the ground is really difficult, but at the same time, for us that we have it, it is really important as well. So I'm very excited about that project, and that's something that we're working on, me and a few partners, very intensely.
And if this project succeeds, what does Venezuela look like in 2035, let's say?
I'm very excited about the business opportunity of Venezuela, because if we are successful, so if we are successful from the policy side and we are successful from the investment business side, it means that we will be turning a country that was communist, poor, such a crisis, into a success story. It means that the millions of people that for 20 years have been struggling, these same people will have access to good opportunities, to quality jobs, to good services, and to a good economy as a whole. It is something that is very deep and very personal for me, because for many years, for my entire life, I grew up in a place in which all conversations, all discussions, everything about my country has been negative, always on the negative side. Always why you are, always the conversation is about how poor we became, how wasted opportunity we have, all that. What will really change if we are successful, for example, in our fund, is that we want to bring a different perception of Venezuela. We want to grow Venezuela, we want to turn Venezuela into a success story, because that's something that I'm really passionate about. We want to bring good quality jobs, we want to grow the economy, and we want to see a lot of innovation in Venezuela. That is a very powerful story. And we also think that when you see the amount of success that you will see in Venezuela, it will also prevent other countries from doing the same mistakes that we make in Venezuela. So that will save many millions of lives. Because in Venezuela, what we had is that we have all our families divided. Everybody is extremely poor in my country. 80% of my people are extremely poor. And these people desperately need investment, good jobs, and good opportunities.
So what are the, let's say, two different questions, but what are the top 3 policies, let's say, that you think can change the country for the best in the next few years? And how is of course, the situation has changed so much in Venezuela since the beginning of the year. What is it like since January this year? Is it better, worse, same? Are there new opportunities? Where are there trade-offs? Because we see it from the outside, so it looks like someone was ousted, but we don't know the reality of the new government. So these are 2 different questions. So what's the new reality in Venezuela in 2026, and what would be the top 3 policies you would need to implement to change the life of Venezuelans?
Yeah, the way I see Venezuela is that we have, first of all, we need 2 types of policies. We need policies that unleash markets, and we need policies that protect markets. When it comes to protect markets, nobody's going to invest in Venezuela if the security situation is not fixed. Nobody will invest in Venezuela if your assets can be taken over, if your executives can be kidnapped, if your investment is not protected by criminal groups. So the protection aspect, I really think, is extremely important. There is certain areas of the economy that are more used to work in insecure environments, like mining, for example, like real mining, like mining copper, mining gold, etc. But most parts of the economy cannot survive if the country is insecure. Right now, Venezuela is not a secure country. It's not a secure country because of some politicians, but because of criminal groups at the same time. So you really need to fix that. When it comes to accelerating markets, the financial system in Venezuela is non-existent. As I told you, just to make everyday transactions, the government creates so much manipulation. They create so much alterations to the market. They have different exchange rates for different types of sectors. All that needs to stop. It really needs to stop. In Venezuela, we need to unleash the power of free markets, financial freedom, so that way banks can do their job, Bitcoin, stablecoins can do their job, and people can transact freely. So that's a type of policy that unleashes markets. And I think that the third type of policy is not just one policy, but it's more of an aggregate of policies, which is that there has to be a new mentality in the Venezuelan state focused on being excellent at this type of the public goods that everybody needs to function. For example, you cannot have an economy if there is no electricity. That's something that people on the right, people on the left, people on the center, whatever you are in the political spectrum, is transversal. You need to have good electricity to have a good economy. Businesses cannot function if they don't have electricity, if they don't have water, if they don't have these basic things that they need. But in order to actually provide that, you need to have an state, you need to have a group of reformers who have the interests, the capabilities, the empowerment to apply and to do so. And that's what we need. That's why we need a full change in the country. So if you improve those aspects, I know for a fact the amount of people who really want to invest in Venezuela. That they see that in Europe it's a bit difficult to invest because of the amount of regulation, etc. In the US it's very expensive to invest because of the amount of competition. And they're looking for alternatives. And the alternative for many people has been to invest in Africa, but that also has its level of complexities. And they also are looking into Latin America. And they're looking especially into Brazil and Argentina. But besides that, they see the potential in Venezuela. Because Venezuela, everybody understands that in the 1980s was the richest country in the region, and now is the poorest. So just by simple logic, you can imagine how we will rebound and we will become maybe not the richest again soon, but it will become a normal country again. And that has tremendous business opportunities. When it comes to the question about how life has changed in Venezuela, the reality is that life for most people in Venezuela, 99% of people, remains the same this year. Economic life has not changed in Venezuela. The issues that I was mentioning to you have not changed in Venezuela. The only thing that have changed is that there is a subset of people who feel that there can be a change, who feel that maybe a future of freedom is right around the corner, who feel that maybe Maduro is no longer there and maybe we'll have real elections again in Venezuela. So it's a matter of hope more than reality right now. And I think that's why it's very important for us to transform that hope into real opportunity. And real opportunity when it comes to the policy front, and real opportunity when it comes to good investment. Because when you bring investment to the country, that means that all these engineers that right now don't have a job or they have bad jobs, they will have good jobs. All these architects, you name it, all these people that are good on technology, because there is very talented technology people in Venezuela. By the way, and partially it's because of the crisis, because they had to find ways to make some money, to learn from technology, etc. So you have very good technology people in Venezuela, and you have a lot of very good human capital also ready to come back to Venezuela.
You saw firsthand your country collapse, and especially monetarily, so with the inflation on the Bolivar. Of course, for the audience that watches the video, this looks so far. We don't really, I think even when we listen to you, there can be some empathy. We can like feel how hard it has become. But then, probably for most people looking at it, they will be like, but it's far. It's far in time and it's far geographically. So I will never be touched by that. But probably, as you were mentioning, a country doesn't collapse in a year. And so there are signals. For a European, for a French who imagines themselves as safe, who have never known this, what signals would you tell them to watch in their country that would, tell them that something's going in the wrong direction? Because one of the key learnings we can have from the conversation is that it's probably easier to fix before it happens than to fix after it happens.
In general, it's very difficult for people to put themselves in the shoes of other populations. The same way that it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in the shoes of somebody in Eastern Ukraine or somebody in the Middle East in a war. It's very difficult, right? I will only say one thing. The Venezuelan story is something that you need to pay attention, because it's not the story of a war. It's not the story of a civil war. It's a story of a continuous deterioration of the political system. Every year the political system became a bit worse. The economic system became a bit worse. And then every year things got slightly worse. until they became really bad. This is something that I feel in some sense Europeans should at least have in their radar. Because the reality is that when you think about the cost of living in Europe, you already see a bit of the warning signs when it comes to the inflation, because things are becoming way more expensive. Just think about how expensive it is to buy an apartment here in Paris. Or think about the relationship between how expensive the cost of living is with the salaries people get. The same way that people in Venezuela became worried about certain economic indicators, I see people here worry about economic indicators. And then you don't realize it, but another decade goes by, and then you realize that your economy is in a real trouble. When your economies are in deep trouble, I also believe that your political systems are in deep trouble. That's when you see the rise of extremism, of radicalism. Why? Because people are demanding change, and they demand radical change. So then democracy becomes weaker as a result of economic dissatisfaction and economic exclusion. Venezuela used to be a rich country. So Venezuela in the 1980s was one of the 20 richest countries in the world. So think about Venezuela to the same level of living standards of an average European country. And now we are in the living standards of Haiti, very poor country. So Venezuela was not always a poor nation. When Venezuela became this process of decay, the Cubans were telling the Venezuelans, be careful, watch out, something wrong is happening. And Venezuelans say, this will never happen in our country, we are democratic, we are rich because we have oil. So it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of other people. I think the most important lesson that people really need to have, people who follow your show, I would say that is, first of all, always pay attention to small problems in your economy, because they will compound. They'll become higher and higher and higher. So pay attention to the problems of your economy and demand your politicians to fix it. Demand your politicians to do so. And from the personal life is that really try to be very smart when it comes to where you put your money, where you invest, what you do, how much you save. Just be responsible in your own personal life, because in general I feel that countries can collapse way higher, way faster than people think. Right now everything can be nice. I never imagined, even when I was 15 years old, 14 years old, roughly 2012 in Venezuela, even with the amount of problems, it was inconceivable to me that we will become a humanitarian crisis. That was not even in the imagination of somebody, even like myself, who was already thinking about these problems. So the same way that I could not imagine what a dystopian future, maybe and hopefully that's not the case, we cannot imagine how bad things can become in our own country if we don't do something about it. The good thing is that here in France, for example, people have all the tools possible. People can vote, people can express themselves, people can be entrepreneurs, people have a say in the future of their country. So that's, I think, the most important, I would say, lesson from the Venezuelan story.
Well, thank you very much, Jorge, for your testimony and everything you said about the situation in Venezuela, and also giving us the ability to see a bright future for the country, especially from this side of the ocean. Where can people follow your work, the Economic Inclusion Group, the Reconstruction Fund? What can you tell the audience for people who are interested in knowing more about you?
I mean, in general, by the way, thank you for the interview. I really appreciate it. So people can reach out to me by Twitter, by X. Jraissati Jorge is my username. People can reach out to me by email, jorge@econinclusion.org. I'm happy to answer any questions about Venezuela. I'm happy to answer any questions they have also about the positive use cases of Bitcoin, because that's why what you're doing matters so much, because Bitcoin sometimes have a negative connotation, especially in policy circles, because people, if somebody is born in Paris, they don't know what is to be on bank. They don't know in majority of cases what is to have these issues. So they can by email, by Twitter, by LinkedIn. I'm very accessible. So any questions they have, please let me know.
Well, thank you very much, Jorge, and we hope the best for you and your country especially.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.